Could you survive the Black Plague? The horrific things that happened the world felt ordinary before anyone understood what was coming. In the middle of the 1300s, life moved at a slow and familiar pace across towns and villages in Europe. People woke at sunrise, worked until their bodies ached, and slept when the light faded. Most never traveled far from where they were born. Their days were shaped by church bells, market days, and the changing seasons. Nothing about their routines suggested that one of the deadliest events in human history was quietly moving toward them. Cities were crowded, noisy, and full of life. Narrow streets twisted between tall wooden buildings that leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets. Homes were small, often holding entire families in a single room. Animals lived close to people. Chickens wandered freely, pigs rooted through waste, and rats scurried through dark corners without drawing much attention. This was normal. No one questioned it. Cleanliness, as we understand it today, did not exist. Waste was thrown into the streets. Water was reused again and again. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and decay, but people were used to it. Most people believed the world worked according to God's will. Illness was common and death was not a stranger. Children often did not survive to adulthood. A bad fever or a simple wound could end a life. Because sickness was part of everyday life, people did not panic easily when someone fell ill. They prayed, rested, and waited. Usually that was all they could do. Doctors were rare, expensive, and often wrong. Still, life went on. Far away, beyond the cities and farms of Europe, trade routes connected continents. Merchants traveled across land and sea, carrying spices, silk, and stories from distant places. Ships arrived in ports filled with goods and weary sailors. These arrivals were exciting. They brought wealth, news, and a sense of connection to the wider world. No one imagined that these same routes could also carry something unseen and deadly. At first, the warnings were quiet. A traveler mentioned sickness in another land. A merchant spoke of entire towns growing silent. These stories sounded exaggerated, like rumors meant to scare or impress. People had heard such tales before. Wars, famines, and strange illnesses were always happening somewhere else. Europe felt safe in its familiar routines. In homes, families gathered around small fires in the evening. Parents told their children stories. Neighbors shared bread and ale. Life was hard, but it was predictable. The future felt like a continuation of the past. Most people expected to live the same lives their parents had lived and for their children to do the same. Change, when it came, was slow. Faith played a central role in daily life. Churches were full, and prayer guided decisions both big and small. If crops failed or sickness spread, people believed it was a test or a punishment. The idea that a disease could spread through tiny creatures or invisible causes did not exist. Without this knowledge, there was no reason to fear everyday contact, shared food, or crowded spaces. Community closeness felt like safety, not danger. Doctors of the time relied on old teachings passed down for centuries. They believed illness came from bad air, unbalanced body fluids, or spiritual weakness. Treatments included herbs, bloodletting, and prayers. Some wore special clothing or masks filled with strong smells, believing it protected them. These practices gave people comfort, even if they offered no real protection. Confidence, even false confidence, helped keep fear away. Seasons changed, markets opened and closed, and ships continued to arrive. When the first signs appeared, they did not seem different from other illnesses. A fever here, weakness there. People rested and hoped for recovery, but something about this sickness was different. It moved faster, it struck harder, and it did not stop. Still, in the beginning, no one saw the full picture. Each death was treated as a single tragedy, not part of something larger. Communities did not yet understand that they were standing at the edge of a disaster that would touch every home, every street, and every heart. The normal sounds of daily life continued. laughter, bargaining, prayer. The silence had not yet arrived. Families planned futures that would never happen. Weddings were arranged. Children were born. Farmers prepared their fields. Life felt fragile, but it always had. No one believed that the world they knew was about to change so completely. The idea that entire towns could vanish seemed impossible. This was the calm before everything broke apart. A time when people trusted familiar patterns and old beliefs, when the greatest danger was hunger or war, not an invisible enemy moving silently among them. The tragedy of this moment lies not in what people did wrong, but in what they could not possibly know. The sickness was already closer than anyone realized. It traveled quietly, without sound or warning. It did not announce itself with armies or storms. It arrived hidden within the everyday movements of life. By the time fear replaced normalcy, it would be far too late. In this moment, before the plague showed its true face, the world was still full of voices, footsteps, and hope. Soon, much of that would be gone. But for now, people lived as they always had, unaware that history was taking a deep breath before unleashing one of its darkest chapters. The change began quietly, almost unnoticed, the way a storm starts far out at sea. Ships continued to arrive at busy ports, their sails heavy with wind and their decks crowded with goods from distant lands. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong, but those who looked closely noticed something unsettling. Some sailors did not come ashore. Others moved slowly, their faces pale, their eyes dull with exhaustion. A few collapsed as soon as they touched land. People whispered, but they did not yet panic. In one port city after another, the same strange pattern appeared. A ship would arrive, and within days someone nearby would fall ill. At first it looked like an ordinary sickness. A fever, chills, deep tiredness. People had seen this before. They brought water, offered prayers, and waited for recovery. But recovery did not come. Instead, the illness grew worse with frightening speed. Strong men were suddenly unable to stand. Healthy women lost their strength overnight. Children who had been laughing days earlier became silent and weak. As days passed, more people became ill. Small, painful swellings appeared on the body. Skin darkened in places. Breathing became difficult. Families watched helplessly as their loved ones faded before their eyes. The sickness did not follow the rules people were used to. It did not respect age, wealth, or faith. It moved fast, leaving little time to understand what was happening. Fear began to spread, slowly at first, then all at once. Markets grew quieter. People avoided one another in the streets. Some covered their faces with cloth, hoping it would protect them. Others burned herbs or incense, believing strong smells could push sickness away. Bells rang more often, calling people to prayer. Churches filled with frightened voices asking for mercy and answers. Doctors were called, but they were just as confused as everyone else. They examined patients, touched swollen skin, and listened to labored breathing. They argued among themselves about the cause. Some blamed bad air. Others pointed to the alignment of stars. Many believed it was a punishment sent from above. Treatments were tried, one after another, but nothing stopped the illness. In some cases, the attempts to help only made suffering worse. Word traveled fast, even in a time without newspapers or machines. Travelers spoke of towns where streets had grown quiet. Merchants told stories of whole households falling ill within days. These stories no longer sounded like exaggerations. They matched what people were seeing with their own eyes. Panic crept into conversations. Parents pulled children close. Neighbors avoided knocking on doors they once visited daily. As the sickness tightened its grip, daily life began to break apart. Shops closed because there was no one left to run them. Fields went untended as farmers stayed indoors or became ill themselves. Food grew scarce in some places, not because there was none, but because fear stopped people from gathering and sharing. Trust, once the heart of community life, started to fade. Some tried to flee. They packed what they could carry and left cities behind, believing distance could save them. But the sickness traveled with them, hidden and silent. Villages that welcomed newcomers soon found themselves facing the same nightmare. Others locked themselves inside their homes, refusing to see anyone, even family. Loneliness became a new kind of pain, heavy and constant. The sound of life changed. Laughter disappeared from streets. Music faded. Instead, there was coughing, crying, and the steady ringing of bells marking death after death. People began to count days not by work or prayer, but by who had fallen ill and who was still standing. Every morning brought relief at being alive and fear of what the day might bring. Faith was tested in ways people had never known. Some prayed harder than ever, filling churches with desperate hope. Others felt abandoned and angry, unable to understand why so many innocent lives were taken. Religious leaders tried to offer comfort, but even they struggled to explain the scale of the suffering. When prayers did not stop the sickness, doubt quietly entered many hearts. Rumors grew darker. Some claimed the illness was spread by poisoned wells. Others blamed strangers or outsiders. Fear made people suspicious. A friendly face could suddenly seem dangerous. Kindness became rare, not because people stopped caring, but because they were afraid to get close. Every interaction felt like a risk. Time itself seemed to move differently. Days blurred together as the sickness continued without pause. Sleep was shallow and restless. Dreams were filled with worry. Even those who had not fallen ill felt its weight pressing on them, a constant reminder that no one was truly safe. Yet, in the middle of all this fear, small moments of humanity survived. A neighbor leaving food outside a door. A parent sitting by a sick child through the night. A stranger offering a quiet prayer. These acts did not stop the sickness, but they reminded people that they were not alone in their suffering. The arrival of the disease marked the end of the world people once knew. What had felt solid and unchanging now seemed fragile. Every routine was broken, every plan uncertain. The illness had entered their lives without warning, and it showed no signs of leaving soon. This was no longer a distant problem or a passing sickness. It was everywhere. In the air people breathed, in the spaces between them, in the fear that followed each step. The realization settled slowly but firmly. Survival was no longer guaranteed. The fight was not against an enemy that could be seen or reasoned with. It was against something invisible, relentless, and deeply terrifying. As the days continued, one truth became clear. The sickness was only beginning, and the worst was still to come. As the sickness continued to spread, society slowly began to fall apart. What once felt like a shared life, built on neighbors helping neighbors, started to disappear. Fear grew stronger than trust. People no longer greeted each other in the streets. Doors stayed closed. Windows were shut tight, even during the day. The sense of togetherness that once held communities together was replaced by silence and suspicion. Families were hit the hardest. In many homes, one person would fall ill, and within days, others would follow. There was little time to react or prepare. A household that had been full of noise and warmth could become quiet in a matter of days. Parents watched their children weaken, unable to protect them. Children watched their parents fade, not understanding why help never came. Love remained, but it was surrounded by fear and helplessness. The process of caring for the sick became overwhelming. At first, family members stayed close, bringing water, food, and comfort. But as the sickness showed how easily it spread, even this began to change. Some people became afraid to touch their loved ones. They stood at a distance, speaking softly, their hearts full of guilt and sorrow. Choosing safety over closeness was a pain many carried for the rest of their lives. As deaths increased, normal customs could no longer be followed. There were too many losses and too little time. Ceremonies that once honored the dead were shortened or skipped entirely. In some places, people were buried quickly, without family present. In others, the responsibility of handling the dead fell to strangers who were paid to do the job. This separation added to the grief, making loss feel cold and unfinished. Public spaces changed completely. Markets that once buzzed with voices stood half empty. Schools closed because there were no teachers left. Workshops stopped because skilled workers were gone. Fields remained untouched, not because people did not care, but because they were sick, afraid, or grieving. Food shortages began to appear, adding hunger to fear. Those in positions of power struggled to respond. Local leaders tried to set rules, but enforcement was weak. Some ordered people to stay inside. Others attempted to limit travel. But without understanding how the sickness spread, these efforts often failed. People followed rules one day and ignored them the next, driven by desperation or disbelief. Social roles blurred and broke. Servants left their posts to protect themselves. Workers demanded higher pay to risk their lives. Some refused to work at all. Old traditions lost their strength as survival became the only goal. Money mattered less than health. Titles meant little when illness did not care who someone was. Fear changed human behavior in painful ways. Neighbors who had known each other for years now avoided eye contact. A cough could cause people to scatter. A stranger walking into town was met with cold stares instead of welcome. Even kindness was questioned. People wondered if help came with hidden danger. In many places, religion intensified the emotional struggle. Some believed the sickness was a test meant to purify society. Others believed it was a sign that the end was near. Prayer gatherings grew, but so did frustration when nothing improved. When faith could not explain the suffering, people felt lost, unsure of what to believe anymore. Groups of people began to search for someone to blame. Fear demanded an explanation, and when none made sense, anger filled the gap. Outsiders, travelers, and unfamiliar faces were treated with suspicion. Accusations spread quickly, often without proof. This led to more division, deepening the pain already present in society. The emotional weight became unbearable for many. Grief piled on top of grief. There was little time to mourn one loss before another arrived. People felt numb, as if their hearts could no longer process sadness. Sleep became difficult. Nights were filled with worry, and mornings brought dread instead of hope. Children were especially affected. Many lost parents and were left alone or sent to live with distant relatives. Some wandered the streets, confused and frightened. Their childhoods ended early, replaced by survival and uncertainty. The laughter that once filled neighborhoods vanished almost completely. Even nature seemed to reflect the change. Without human activity, streets grew quiet. Weeds pushed through stone paths. Animals roamed freely in places once crowded with people. The world looked the same, yet felt completely different. It was as if time had paused, leaving behind a broken version of life. Despite everything, some people tried to hold on to order. They cleaned streets, cared for the weak, and tried to keep records of what was happening. These efforts were small compared to the scale of the disaster, but they mattered. They showed that even in collapse, the human spirit did not disappear entirely. As days turned into weeks, the understanding grew that life might never return to what it once was. Too much had been lost. Too many bonds had been broken. Society was no longer standing on firm ground. It was surviving moment by moment, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. The sickness did more than take lives. It reshaped how people saw the world and each other. Trust was damaged. Certainty was gone. The idea that life followed clear rules no longer made sense. People learned that everything they depended on could disappear without warning. This was the true collapse, not just of bodies, but of systems, beliefs, and relationships. The illness had exposed how fragile society really was. And as it continued, it became clear that surviving was not only about avoiding sickness. It was about enduring fear, loss, and a world that no longer felt familiar. The hardest truth settled slowly into everyone's mind. Even if the sickness ended, nothing would ever be the same again. Surviving during this time became a daily struggle, not just against sickness, but against fear, loneliness, and the loss of everything familiar. Those who remained healthy carried a heavy burden. Every morning began with uncertainty. Waking up without a fever felt like a small victory, but it came with the fear that it might not last. People listened closely to their own breathing, checked their skin, and paid attention to every ache, wondering if it was the beginning of the end. The streets told their own story. They were quieter than ever before. Footsteps echoed where crowds once gathered. Many homes stood empty, their doors hanging open, their windows broken by time and neglect. Inside, personal items remained untouched, as if their owners had simply stepped away and never returned. These silent houses became painful reminders of how quickly life could disappear. Those who ventured outside did so carefully. People avoided touching anything that did not belong to them. They walked with their heads down, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. A simple conversation felt dangerous. Even familiar faces caused unease. Survival meant distance, and distance meant loneliness. Some survivors tried to protect themselves in unusual ways. They wore layers of clothing, even in warm weather. They carried small bundles of herbs or kept scented cloths close to their faces, believing it would protect them. These actions offered little real safety, but they gave people a sense of control in a world that felt completely out of control. Groups formed around shared beliefs. Some traveled from place to place, believing that public acts of repentance could bring relief. Others isolated themselves completely, refusing to leave their homes for weeks. Both choices came from the same place: desperation. When knowledge failed, people turned to whatever gave them hope, no matter how fragile. Food became a serious concern. With farms unattended and trade disrupted, supplies ran low. Those who had stored food survived longer, but even they worried about the future. Hunger weakened bodies and minds. People had to choose between risking exposure to find food or staying inside and slowly growing weaker. There were no good choices, only less terrible ones. Emotional pain cut just as deeply as physical suffering. Survivors carried memories that haunted them. The sound of coughing in the night, the empty space at the table where someone once sat, the feeling of helplessness when comfort was needed most. These memories followed people everywhere, even in moments of rest. Some individuals showed great courage. They cared for the sick when others were too afraid. They brought water, cleaned rooms, and offered comfort through words and presence. These people knew the risk, yet chose compassion over fear. Their actions did not change the course of the sickness, but they gave dignity to those who suffered and meaning to those who helped. At the same time, darker behaviors appeared. Fear pushed some people to act in ways they never would have before. Kindness faded in certain places, replaced by selfishness. Trust was broken easily. Promises meant little when survival felt uncertain. These actions left deep emotional scars that lasted long after the sickness passed. The mind struggled to keep up with the constant stress. Many survivors felt numb, as if emotions had shut down to protect them. Others felt overwhelming sadness or anger. There was little time or space to process these feelings. Each day demanded focus on survival, leaving grief to settle quietly in the background. Children who survived carried a special kind of pain. Many had lost parents, siblings, or friends. They were forced to grow up quickly, learning to care for themselves or depend on strangers. Their understanding of the world was shaped by loss and uncertainty. Play and innocence were replaced by caution and silence. Time lost its meaning. Without regular work, gatherings, or celebrations, days blended together. People measured time by who was still alive and who was not. Seasons changed, but life did not feel renewed. Even the arrival of spring failed to bring joy. Beauty felt out of place in a world filled with suffering. Despite everything, the human need for connection did not disappear. People found small ways to remind themselves they were still alive. A shared meal, even in silence. A few words exchanged from a distance. A song sung softly behind closed doors. These moments were brief, but they mattered. They helped people hold onto their humanity. Nature continued its quiet rhythm. The sun rose and set. Rain fell. Plants grew in places long ignored. This contrast between the steady world and human suffering was hard to understand. Some found comfort in it, believing life would continue no matter what. Others felt anger, wondering why the world moved on when so many lives had stopped. As weeks turned into months, survivors changed. They became more cautious, more aware of how fragile life was. Small problems no longer seemed important. Priorities shifted. Survival, kindness, and presence mattered more than wealth or status. Those who lived through this period were not the same people they had been before. The struggle to survive was not just about avoiding illness. It was about enduring loss, fear, and a constant sense of danger. It was about waking up each day and choosing to keep going, even when hope felt distant. Strength came not from certainty, but from persistence. By this stage, the sickness had left deep marks on everyone it touched, whether they fell ill or not. Survivors carried invisible wounds. They learned that survival came with a cost, and that cost was memory. What they had seen and felt would stay with them forever. Yet, even in the darkest moments, life did not completely disappear. It held on quietly, waiting. And those who survived, broken but breathing, became witnesses to one of the most difficult periods humanity had ever faced. Slowly, almost without anyone noticing at first, the sickness began to loosen its grip. There was no clear day when people could say it was over. It did not leave the way it arrived. Instead, it faded quietly. Fewer people fell ill each week. Fewer bells rang. The silence that once felt heavy began to change its meaning. It was no longer only the sound of loss. It became the sound of survival. Those who remained alive stepped cautiously back into the world. Doors that had stayed shut for months were opened. People stood in the streets again, unsure of what to do or say. Faces looked older, thinner, and tired. Many eyes carried stories that words could not fully explain. Even greetings felt strange, as if people had forgotten how to speak freely. Cities and villages looked different. Entire streets were empty. Homes stood abandoned, slowly falling apart. Workshops were quiet, their tools untouched. Fields had grown wild. Nature had filled the spaces humans left behind. It was painful to see how much had been lost, but it was also impossible to ignore that life was still present. Survivors searched for loved ones, hoping against reason that someone might still be alive. Some were reunited with family members they thought were gone forever. These moments were filled with tears and relief. Others found only empty houses and unanswered questions. For many, there was no closure, only acceptance. The loss of so many people changed everything. There were fewer workers, fewer leaders, fewer teachers. This created challenges, but it also changed old systems. Those who survived found that their labor was now more valuable. People who once had no voice gained new opportunities. Long-standing rules began to bend, and in some cases, break completely. Communities slowly tried to rebuild. Markets reopened with fewer stalls but renewed purpose. People shared what they had, knowing how fragile life could be. Cooperation returned, not because fear was gone, but because people understood that survival depended on each other. The pain they had lived through taught them the cost of division. Faith also changed. Some returned to prayer with deeper devotion, believing survival was a gift. Others struggled with belief, carrying unanswered questions that would never fully fade. Religion remained important, but it was no longer simple. It had been tested, just like everything else. Children who survived grew into a new world. They carried memories of loss, but also the chance to shape something different. Many became more independent, more thoughtful. Their childhoods had been shortened, but their understanding of life was deeper than most adults before them. Stories of the sickness were shared carefully. People spoke of it in quiet voices, often late at night. These stories were not meant to frighten, but to remember. Remembering felt important. Forgetting felt dangerous. Survivors believed that if people forgot what happened, they might repeat the same mistakes. The world after the sickness was not joyful, but it was alive. People learned to appreciate small things, a shared meal, a peaceful morning, the simple fact of being present. The future was uncertain, but it always had been. Now that truth was impossible to ignore. Those who lived through this time carried invisible scars. Certain smells, sounds, or seasons brought memories rushing back. Grief never fully disappeared, but it softened with time. Healing did not mean forgetting. It meant learning how to live alongside memory. As years passed, new generations were born who did not experience the sickness themselves. They listened to the stories, sometimes struggling to believe them. To them, the events sounded distant and unreal, but the survivors knew how real it had been. They carried the responsibility of passing on the truth. The sickness reshaped how people understood life, death, and community. It showed how quickly everything could change and how strong people could be when they had no other choice. It revealed both the darkest and the strongest parts of humanity. In the end, survival was not just about staying alive. It was about rebuilding meaning after loss. It was about choosing connection after isolation. It was about learning that life's value is not found in how long it lasts, but in how deeply it is lived. The world moved forward, changed forever, and those who survived became living proof that even after unimaginable darkness, life, slowly and quietly, finds a way to continue.